Okay, so we continue the morning session with a talk of Charles Bordenave on spectral graphs.
Okay, so for this last lecture, so we'll review another method to bound the multiplicities of eigenvalues, and I will give you some. I will try to open to explain you what can you do next and try to understand the behavior of eigenvectors and what we call local spectral law. So let's recall you when you have your finite graph. We were interested by with n vertices. We were interested by the empirical distribution of the eigenvalues of its adjacency operator. Okay, and when we had a unimodular law on random rooted graphs, we defined what we called the spectral measure, which was the expectation with respect to the randomness of the graph of the spectral measure at the root of this the expectation with respect to the randomness of the graph of the spectral measure of the root of the adjacency operator. Okay, so last time we found a method to upper bound eigenvalue multiplicities, which worked only for finite graphs. Okay, the story about determinants and okay. So our other method is also based works of course for finite graph, but we will use it. There is a version which works also for in the general case of unimodular graphs. And in fact, that's in this setting that it will be most useful. Okay, so we call it, I will call you that this is Arnab-Sen and Balin-Firag. I hope I'm correct. Okay, so what's something what we call monotone labeling. Okay, what is that? So, imagine that you have a labeling of your graph. Okay, what is it? It's a map from the vertex set to integers. Okay, so let's just think first as G finite and to avoid any confusion. Okay, so I give you such map, so which gives a number to every vertex. Now, given this map, you will give a name to any vertex. It will receive one of these three names. So call U in V. So prodigy. If U as a neighbor in the graph V, okay, which is U as a neighbor in the graph, such that all neighbors, such that the label of V is strictly less than the label of U, okay? And this inequality is also satisfied for all other neighbors of V, meaning that for all W neighbors of V, W different from U, eta of W is strictly less than eta of U. Maybe a picture is better. So you have your prodigy U. Okay, we say that so it has some neighbors, but he has a particular neighbor V, which has neighbors W1 and up to WD. And what we say that eta of U is larger than all of these guys. Okay. You can also be a vertex can also be a level vertex if it's not a prodigy and if it's just a local maximum. So, but for all u neighbors, so for all v neighbors of u, eta of v is less than eta of u. Okay? And you are bad otherwise. So as the name suggests, you have the freedom to choose your labeling, but you want as many prodigies as possible, and if not as many level vertices as possible, and you want to avoid bad vertices. Okay. So what can you do? So there is given any labeling, there is the following theorem, which bounds the multiplicities of eigenvalues. Okay. So let G and eta be as above. Okay, let B be the number of bad vertices. Okay, and let lambda be an eigenvalue with multiplicity, say m. Okay. And let L of J, or J in V, be the multiplicity of lambda in the graph spanned by the vertices with label J. Okay, I look at the adjacency matrix of the subgraph who have a label J. Okay? Then I have V bound, but the multiplicity of lambda in my original graph is bounded by the sum of the multiplicities of lambda in the subgraphs, where I just look at the subgraphs. I divide my graph into the level vertices. Okay, sorry. So I look at the level vertices with label J, and I add B. Okay? So if I sum these inequalities, if M1, Mk are multiplicities of, let's say, lambda 1, lambda k, if I sum k times, I apply this inequality for each of the mi's, I sum them, these sums will be less than the number of level vertices. Okay. Then I have that M1 plus M2 plus Mk is bounded by L plus KB, where L is the number of level vertices. Okay, so it may look strange. Let's take the example of the vertical percolation, and we'll see it's not too strange. So I recall you, I have my finite box with n vertices, and I remove some vertical edge. Any given subset. We saw with the other method that we could bound the multiplicity of any eigenvalue. So here also we can do that by choosing a good label. Okay. Let's say, so all labels, all vertices have coordinates, okay? So I just take, for example, the label of a vertex whose x coordinate is x as being x. Okay. So maybe I will start that. Okay. So all these vertices have label 1, their neighbor label 2, and so on. Okay. how many how many prodigies do I have? If I take a vertex whose x coordinate is I, he has some neighbor, okay, on the same level, who have also a coordinate I, but it has a neighbor which has coordinate a minus 1 if I is larger than or equal to 2. Okay? And this particular neighbor of this vertex may have, as all its neighbors, have label either I minus 2 or I minus 1. Okay, so I repeat, I as a neighbor, this vertex as a neighbor, whose label is prickleless. Okay, so it's the first condition. And all vertices neighbor to this vertex, which are not themselves this one, have a label which is either I minus 1 or I minus 2. So in particular, all vertices with label larger than 2 are prodigies. Is it clear? Okay, and all these ones, they are bad because they are not a local minimum, because they have a neighbor who has a larger. They have a neighbor who has a larger index, larger label. So in conclusion, we have L, which is 0, and B, which is N. So this is the total number of level vertices. So if I apply this bound, it tells you that the multiplicity of any eigenvalue is bounded by N, which was exactly the bound that we obtained with the minimal path patching. Okay. So, which is the little o of the total number of vertices. Okay, but we can look at another example. Imagine that you have a tree. Okay, and a path in this tree. Here we represent the path. I take any 2 points x and y in my tree, and I have a path, and my tree continues. Okay? And I have some vertices in my tree. There is a nice way to label these vertices. So I have the path, let's call it T. I have my tree. I have my tree T. Okay, so what I am saying is that so I could represent it. There are finite subtrees here, and I have my path in the middle. I could consider the labeling, which put, for example, value 0 at the beginning of the path, starts increasing and arrives at, I don't know, at 2 in my picture, but let's say K. Okay, where K is the length of the path. And then I put labels, 0 for all vertices here, 1 for all vertices here, K for all vertices here. And since it's a tree, there is no ambiguity. Okay, so here I have all vertices on the path except so all vertices on the path, they have a neighbor which is the preceding point, such that all its with a smaller label, and all its neighbors have a smaller label, right? So all these guys, they are prodigy. Okay, this one is bad, and all of them, all the other one, they are level vertices because all their neighbors have the same label. Okay, so if you apply this statement, you obtain that is called Gutzil lemma. Which says that if T is a tree, the multiplicity of an eigenvalue, okay, let's call T1 to T2 to Tk, is bounded by the sum of the multiplicities of these eigenvalues along my path plus 1. Okay? So, and this is nothing else than the multiplicity of this eigenvalue in the tree T where I've removed my path. So this is called Gutzil lemma. I made it explicit because I will mention something similar. Okay. So the proof of this the theorem I just derived. Okay, I will just prove it for check that the multiplicity of any eigenvalue is less than n in this example, vertical percolation. Okay. So I take an eigenvalue lambda. I call m its multiplicity. Multiplicity. And so m is the dimension of the eigenspace S. Okay? So this is the eigenspace associated to. Okay, so we want an upper bound on the dimension of the eigenspace. Okay, so you call B. So the set of vectors. So it's a vector space. The set of vectors in Rn such that f of v is 0 for all v in V. For all v which are bad vertices. Okay, so in words, is a set of vectors which vanish on bad vertices. So, okay? Now, the codimension formula tells me that the dimension of S intersected by B is at least the dimension of S minus the codimension of B. Okay, so what is the codimension of B? It's n minus the dimension of B. Okay, but since I have B bad vertices, this is B. Okay, and this is M. So the inequality that I have just at the above asserts that this is 0. So why is that? Okay, so what is S intersected with B? It's a vector space. It's an eigenvalue. It's an eigenvector which vanish, which is 0 for all bad vertices. Okay. So what do I write? I write I take my vector A. F is equal to lambda F, and F is 0 on bad vertices. Okay, I do it on this example because otherwise the proof is slightly more complicated. Okay, so you write the eigenvalue equation here. Okay, so this eigenvalue equation tells me that lambda of F of, if I take V a bad vertex, lambda F of V is the sum of the neighbor of V of F of U. Okay, but this neighbor, in particular, it implies that this vertex, so this is 0, because F is 0 on bad vertices. Okay, and in this sum, I have this guy, and all other one have all the others, I have a label 1. Okay, so they are bad also. So this equation implies that F of 2y is 0. if V is 1y. Okay, because this is f of 2y plus f possibly with some, if the edge is present, it could be f of 1 x minus 1 plus possibly f of x plus 1. But by assumption, these two are zeros. This is 0, so this is 0. So I have proved that, in fact, everything here is 0. And then I iterate, and I find that any vector which is in S intersecting with B is 0. Okay, so you can generalize it to prove the theorem, but so the idea is that the labeling gives you an order in which you solve the eigenvalue equation. Okay. So now there is a version of the theorem which holds for so this is essentially the same proof. So if you take rho a unimodular measure, okay, and I want a pair formed by G, the pair of the rooted graph as low a distribution rho. Okay, but I also want to assume that I have some labeling eta from the vertex set of G to Z, such that this is its distribution is unimodular. So Andreas explained in his first lesson that you could generalize the topology, the Benjamin-Ishram topology, to weighted graphs. Okay, so labeling is nothing else than a label but a colored graph where you put a color or a number on each vertex. So the notion of unimodularity carries over. Okay. Okay, so imagine that now you have your graph, you have your unimodular graph, and you have a unimodular labeling. Okay. Okay, then what you have is that if you look at the sum of the mass of any k multiplicities, it's bounded by k times the probability that the root is bad, plus the probability that the root is level. Okay, and there is a version of this which says that this corresponds to the second statement. The stronger statement is that mu rho of lambda is bounded by the probability that the root is bad plus sum of Lj, okay, where this is the von Neumann dimension okay, of the eigenspace associated to eigenvalue lambda in the subgraph of vertices with label J. Okay, whatever. It's not. It's the same. If you think about it a second, it is actually the same statement. But I don't want to enter too much in the detail. So let's stick to that. Okay. So now, when we saw that there was a very nice labeling when we had a tree, okay? When we give this proof of the dilemma. So what I want to do is to apply this criterion, which works on possibly infinite graph, okay? To bound the multiplicities of eigenvalues of trees. And the idea will be related to this one. Okay, so for that you need a notion of unimodular of a line ensemble. So what is a line ensemble? Okay, so there is a way to picture it and a way to define it properly. So let's first make a picture. So imagine that you have a tree. Okay. So it could be like that. So this could represent a tree. Okay, so you have some path which goes to infinity, and you have a finite pending subtrees, branching point. This is my infinite tree, and I don't know, maybe the root is somewhere here. So what is a line ensemble? A line ensemble is a subset of edge in my tree which do not cross. A subset of lines which do not cross. For example, this. Okay. So you could define it as being a label on edges of your graph. So if your tree is, you could define it on the edge by saying that the weight of your line of an edge should be either 0 or 1, and you encode the constraint that you want your line not to intersect by saying that for any vertex, the sum of the weights along all neighbors of your vertex can be only 0 or 2. If you do that, if you have such a weighting, it defines this red curve here. This says that your edge cannot belong to. Okay, so your edge is in or out your substructure, and this says that any vertex can be adjacent to at most 0 or 2 vertices. So you cannot have a line which stops because it corresponds to a value of 1. Okay. So when you say that you have an invariant line ensemble, if the triplet formed by the tree, the weighting, and the root is unimodular. Okay, so by every time it's an abuse of notation, of course, because what is unimodular, it is low, but okay. So here is the statement. But if also if you have your unimodular tree, by that I mean that the support of rho is contained in rooted trees, and you have an invariant line ensemble. Okay. Then the probability. Let's first try the first statement. If you look at mu of rho, you look at its purely atomic part, and you look at the total mass of the purely atomic part. It's bounded by the probability that the root is in your invariant line ensemble. Okay, so using this, so this would correspond. This makes use of this property, and if you use this one, which I didn't, what you obtain is that the multiplicity, the mass of an atom, is bounded by the probability that the root is not in your line ensemble times the mass of an atom in another unimodular measure, where rho prime is a law of, maybe if you want it like that, it's a law of your tree where you remove the invariant line ensemble. You look at the connected component of the root. It's routed at the root, and condition on the root is not in L in your line ensemble. Okay, so you can check that this is a unimodular measure, and you have this property. So you bound what you are doing. You bound the mass of an atom by the mass of an atom in a subtree of your tree. And so if you sum this over all lambda, you get that, of course. Because the sum of... Okay. So the proof is exactly the same idea as the labeling. Given this line ensemble, I should try to find a nice labeling. Okay, so what does it mean that my labeling is unimodular? It notably means that in distribution, if for example I make a if I make a rule which depends on the root, for example, I define the labeling by the distance to the root or something like that, it will not be unimodular, typically. But a rule which does not depend on the, which does not depend on the, if you find a labeling which does not depend on the, whose labeling does not depend on the root, but just depend on your underlying tree T, then it will be unimodular. Okay. Okay, so how do you build such labeling? So you fix a P an integer. Okay, and okay, so first, before we want to define one form on edges. No, first, you can assume that your lines, they come with some orientation. Okay, for example, you could toss I the variables. Yes? Because I made a mistake. Thank you. So your lines comes up to, if you want, you can enrich your probability space so that your lines come with some orientation. When you have your orientation, you can define a one form by saying that W of UV, if U and V are neighbors, okay, which is minus W of VU, okay, which will be equal to 1. First, if 0, if UV so is not in L, okay, it will be equal to 1 if the oriented edge UV is in my oriented line. Okay, so if I take a specific edge, this oriented edge is in the sense of it would have value 1. And it's minus 1 if VU is in L. Okay? Okay, so now I have my integer. I want to define a labeling on my vertex set to Z over PZ, such that the discrete gradient of eta is W. Meaning that eta of V minus eta of U is W of VU. Okay, so I claim that once you have chosen, once you have chosen the value somewhere of the function eta, it defines the value of the labeling which satisfies this uniquely. Okay, because if let's say that you have fixed the value of the root to be let's say that p equal to 3, and the value of the root is 1. Okay, if this is the picture. All neighbors of the root, my root is not on my line ensemble, so they will all have label 1. This guy has label 1, and so on. I arrive here, this guy has label 1. Up to here, label 1. Okay? Now, when I am here, where is my head? Okay. So when I am here, I follow the direction of the arrow. So this will be 1, 2. So this will be 0, 1, 2, and so on. And this will be 0, 2, okay. And here are the same. 2, 0, 0. Okay, and when I arrive in a finite connected component, when I arrive in this component, everybody here receives value 1. Okay, so this way I define a labeling such that all vertices in my lines, say along the line, you increase by 1 in z over pz, and in all connected in all other components, the value of the label is unchanged. Okay, so there is a finite number of values. There are p possibilities for such maps. Once you have chosen one, you have chosen everybody. So you could sample one uniformly at random. But when you do that, you will obtain a unimodular. If you do that, you will obtain a unimodular labeling. Okay, but with this labeling, it's exactly as in Gödel's lemma. So all levels, all these vertices are level vertices. Okay, because all the neighbors have exactly the same value. All vertices on the lines which have not value 0, okay, they are prodigies. Because they have a neighbor which is the previous one on the line, such that all its other neighbors have a label smaller. Okay, and the zeros, they are bad. It's exactly the same construction in the first lemma, but and then if I apply the theorem, this one, I get that let's say the total mass of the total mass of any given eigenvalues is bounded by k times the probability that the root is bad. Okay, so the probability that the root is bad, it's at most the root must be on the line, and it must have received the label p. Okay, so it's at most 1 over p plus the number of level vertices. I just erased again the theorem, so I rewrite it. So it's bounded by k by probability the root is bad plus probability that the root is level, which is exactly k over p bounded by k over p plus probability that 0 is not in time. So you let p goes to infinity and you obtain that this in fact will be less than probability that 0 is not in time. Okay, and then since you can sum over for arbitrary k, you obtain this. Okay, and for this one, so now the question is, if you want to apply this result, you would like to be able to construct on trees this unimodular line ensembles. And Balint is very good at that. Yes. So the ones are prodigies because they have a neighbor, this one. He has a neighbor, so 1 has a neighbor, 0, such that you're right. You're right. Okay. So it was. Thank you. So these two are bad. So I made a mistake. So it's t minus 1. Okay. 0 and 1. 1 and 0 are not. Okay. Thank you. You understand better than me. Okay, so now you want to build invariant line ensembles. So what do? You have this statement which says that if T is a unimodular tree, so let's call rho its law, such that T has at least 2 topological n with rho positive probability. So topological n for us is just an infinite semi-infinite path starting from the root with at least 2 topological n with rho positive probability. Okay, for example, the unimodular, for example, the d-regular tree, the infinite d-regular tree, or this Galton-Watson tree when they are supercritical. So when the mean of string distribution is large enough, they have, in fact, an infinite number of n. So if this condition holds, then there exists an invariant line ensemble such that the probability that the root is in the line is positive. Which means that if you have any unimodular tree with at least 2 topological n, then it has some continuous spectrum. And so this is a random tree. So once I fix my tree, I want to know whether or not there exist 2 or not infinite semi-infinite paths from 0 which never backtracks, for example. Since I am a new tree, it's quite easy to define. So by meaning rho, I remind you that rho is the law of difficulty. Okay, so and we have an explicit bound such that if the degree of the vertex of if almost surely the degree of the vertex are bounded by D, then you have an lower bound on the density, which is at least 1/3 times the expected degree of should have it correct. The expected degree of the root divided by D. And if when this condition is not satisfied, you always have this bound. So if the expectation of the degree squared is finite, this is at least 1/6 of the expectation of the degree squared. Divided by the expectation of the degree -2, you take the positive part, you square that. So we have it gives pretty explicit bounds for the total mass of atoms in any unimodular tree. Okay, so you may be shocked by the fact that I have a topological condition in the first statement saying that if I have at least two topological ends, then I have an invariant line ensemble with positive probability, and then I have just very simple bounds just with degrees. You should be shocked by that, unless you are very smart. Because so what it turns out is that for unimodular trees, the number of topological ends is in fact characterized by the degree. So you have this proposition by so you can find it with the reference of Aldous and Lyons, but I think it's due to Benjamini. Perez, Lyons, and Schramm, where if T is a unimodular tree supported on infinite trees. Okay, so with probability 1, my tree is infinite. Okay, then the expectation of the degree of the root is at least 2, and the degree of the root is 2. It's equivalent to T as a unique, almost surely, a unique topological end. What? Is it correct? Ah, all right. Yes, no. Yes, because there is Z. Okay. So essentially, as soon as you have, and when the degree is, so when the degree is larger than 2, the expected degree is larger than 2, you know that you are going to have an invariant line ensemble with positive probability. Okay. So it leaves room for so even in the context of trees, it leaves some room to some open questions. So there are some is there some criterion for unimodular trees with one end? So last time I mentioned this skeleton tree where you have a path to infinity which is indexed by n, and then you attach independent and equally distributed random unimodular Galton-Watson trees with Poisson distribution with parameter 1. So this one is at expected degree 2, it has one topological end, and we don't know, for example, what is if he has or not continuous spectrum. How much time do I have? Okay, so I'm very late. So I will not try to prove that. So what I will do instead is in 10 minutes. What I will do instead is try to say a few words about at least some question about local laws and eigenvectors. finite graphs, which is, I think, a domain where a lot needs to be done. Okay, so we have seen that if you have a sequence Gn of finite graphs, such that U of Gn converge to some limit unimodular measure rho, we have seen that it implies that for any interval I, mu of U Gn, which I just call Gn, the empirical distribution of the eigenvalues, if I count the proportion of them which falls into the interval I, goes to the mass of the spectral measure on the same interval. Okay. In situations where I will just speak about local laws. So, in situation where mu of rho has a density, so assume, for example, that you are interested by looking at eigenvalues in some neighborhood minus t plus x0. Okay, where t is supposed to be small and x0 is when this measure has a density. Okay, if mu rho has density f of x0 at x0, this is roughly the cardinal of the Lebesgue measure of I, times f of x0. So you could ask, what you could wonder, does a local law exist? Meaning that, can I find some vanishing intervals of vanishing size such that such convergence still makes sense? So, which you can reformulate. Better reformulate this way. Can you okay, so you divide, you would like that the limit, now your interval depends on n, so you take a sequence Tn which goes to 0. Okay, so this is Tn. And you would like to know whether or not this holds. And for interval as small as possible. Okay? This is a local law. Spectral law. Which has been studied a lot in random matrices. And so, for graphs, we are very far from understanding this local law at the scale where which we suppose they hold. Because, for example, imagine that you have a irregular graph, okay, which converge to this Kestel-Mackey distribution. Okay, you may remember that this Kestel-Mackey distribution has support -2 square root of the -1 to square root of the -1, but whatever. The eigenvalues of a irregular graph will be between -d and d. Okay, there is n eigenvalues inside here. So we expect that the eigenvalues, probably there will be, we expect that there will be, if I take an interval in this set where there is a positive proportion of eigenvalues, we expect that the eigenvalues will have a density which will be, the distance between two successive eigenvalues should be of order 1/n. Okay? So we expect that such kind of result would hold for interval which are, let's say, much larger than 1/n, but very close to 1/n. So the best for random irregular graphs, for example, the best statement that we can do is for statements which are of size 1/log n. So we are very far from proving these local laws at the regime where we think they hold. We can also speak about eigenvectors, but this I don't have time, so I will skip it. So I will just tell you in 1 minute how local convergence is related to this result. Yes? Okay, so if you know what a Wigner matrix is, yes? So you have ID entries and symmetric symmetric matrix with ID entries up to symmetry. So when you rescale them properly, we know that these local laws exist up to like intervals of order log n over n, for example, or if you are much smaller. And in fact, okay. So the idea is to try to reinterpret. So in random matrices, people have proved these local laws using notably a method based on the resolvent. So in 1 second, you can define the resolvent of your operator like that. Okay, where Z is a complex number with positive imaginary part. Okay, and by some it's enough to this statement is roughly equivalent to if you take if you take Z, so this you have the eigenvalues. Okay, so the trace of R of Z is a sum of the 1 over the eigenvalues minus Z, right? So 1 over n, it's 1 over n, and which is, you recognize this as the integral of lambda minus Z against my the spectral measure of my graph. Okay? So the trace of the resolvent, the normalized trace of the resolvent, give you the Cauchy Stieltjes transform of your spectral measure. And if you want to prove a local law at for intervals of size I don't know, Tn, which goes to 0, it's roughly equivalent to prove that if you take, let's say that you are interested by an interval which is of the form minus Tn over 2 plus x0 Tn over 2 plus Tn over 2, so you are interested by finding these local laws around the point x0, as before. So what is roughly equivalent to prove that 1 over n trace of the resolvent of x0 plus itn minus will converge to the minus the resolvent of in the limit in your limit graph mu rho de lambda of lambda plus x0 plus itn, that this goes to 0. So you can transfer local laws by proving convergence of the resolvent when you get very close. So this is an analytic function, and its poles are on the real axis. So when you get very close to the poles of this analytic function, the closer you are, the harder it is, because the more wide the resolvent behaves. But this will give exactly the information you need to prove this local law. So I think I'm done with time, but I will just write one lemma to make the connection with local convergence, the Benjamin-Ishram convergence. Which says that imagine that you have two graphs, let's say a same root, which are isomorphic, okay, and with degree for simplicity are bounded. Okay, and you want them to be isomorphic up to depth h. Okay, so if I look at the h neighborhood, they are isomorphic. So then you have this fact that the value of the resolvent at x plus it for the first graph. So I look at the entry, the value of the resolvent at the root for the first graph, minus the value of the resolvent for the second graph. This is bounded by 1 to some constant, I think 3 times d times h times t power to h. Okay, so it's exactly like in David Germanic's talk. If you have two graphs whose h neighborhood are close up to depth h, then their resolvent will be exponentially close as soon as h, the depth, is larger than the distance at which the reciprocal of the distance of the where you want to look at the resolvent. So, and this is just the idea, just that the resolvent, if you satisfy this, then you have the first two h moments. If you expand this into moments in series, the first two h moments will coincide. So it's just a linear interpolation result. The proof is very short. And so in typical graphs, so we'll go to 0 if ht goes to 0, or maybe I should write if t is larger than 1 over h. Okay? I know, so if t is smaller, t is larger than 1 over h. Okay, and we know that in graphs, from this you can deduce the local law to this reason, and you know that in graphs, the depth at which, for example, a uniform d-regular graph coincides with a d-regular tree is at depth of order log n. So it explains you why 1 over log n is a kind of a wall for this technique. Okay, I think I'm really out of time. So there are more problems in the notes at the end related to this, and you can also say it's interesting result on eigenvector. Okay, but thank you. Well, so the reason is, well, it's not going to be sharp because if you expect this to be true, for the type of resolvent that we are looking at, it's supposed to, you could do probably, you're supposed to do much better. But it's just based on the fact that if you have a function f, and there is a polynomial, f is ck, there is a polynomial p of degree n, which in this case will be 2 times h, and you want to show that this f of lambda minus p of lambda is, you want to find some bound. So you will find something like up to constant, like C1 modulus of lambda divided by n times, okay, I forgot it, but maybe there is an infinity norm of the case derivative of f, okay, whatever, a formula. But so it's just based that for any smooth function, you can approximate them by polynomials in any compact interval. So in fact, so it's a worst case, and we know that it's the whole problem. We know exactly what are these optimal constants, C0 and C1. So, but it's very rough because we don't use the fact that the function comes from the resultant. We just bound stupidly the L infinity norm of the derivative of lambda gives 1 over lambda minus c. So it's not stated like that. Okay, with the correct sentence, it's optimal. The supremum over all fck is such that against the polynomial. Okay, so this will be optimal, but not probably for this choice of function with